Okay, everybody, I am back for another vlog, and I am going to draw two more books out of this jar. I'm going to draw a nonfiction one and a fiction one, so let's see how it goes. Okay, nonfiction is, all right, this is a kid's book, Song of the Vikings by Brown. Not sure what that one is. Let me check it out, and let's pick a nonfiction. Oh, no, that's not a nonfiction. Okay, so let's try and find a nonfiction. Here we go. Author and editor, a working guide. Ooh, that sounds exciting. Okay, so I will find those two books and be right back. Okay, so I found the books. They are actually, I had it on the wrong colored paper. They're actually both nonfiction. This is author and editor, a working guide, but it's a really tiny book. So I will still read both of these. This is obviously a writing book. This Song of the Vikings one is about Snorri Sturluson and the making of the Norse myths. So that should be super interesting for me because I love myths and stuff, especially Norse myths. So I'm going to go ahead and draw another fiction book out of here. That's nonfiction. I'm not even going to look at it. Nonfiction. Ah, here we go. Here's some fiction. Let's see what this one is. This is Come Back by Dick Francis. Now, I just read a Dick Francis one. I'll look that one up and see if I feel like reading another one right now, because his are really good. So I'll find it and let you know. So here is Come Back by Dick Francis. And this is a story about a guy named Peter Darwin, who's gone on leave from the Foreign Office, and he finds himself back in his childhood home. And he's working with a veterinary surgeon, and there's an unexplained death of a string of valuable racehorses. So he starts looking into it. So I think I will definitely read that one because I love Dick Francis. He's one of my favorite authors. So I will read those ones and I will let you know how they go. So, a little update for you. I started each of these books, so I was going to let you know what my thoughts were. So, first of all, this one here, I actually decided to just unhaul it because it was published in, let me see here, 1983. So, basically, anything in it is going to be completely out of date. it kind of covers, the author and editor relationship and all that sort of thing. But I kind of skimmed through it, and yeah, it's very out of date. So I'm going to just go ahead and unhaul that one. But I started on Comeback. I read the first chapter, and I'm definitely going to continue that one. It's a Dick Francis, and he's one of my favorite authors. The funny thing that I'm finding, though, is that I compare all of the main characters back to my favorite book of his, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And so I haven't yet found a character that I immediately go, oh, wow, this is awesome. It's, I'm always like, well, he's not as good as Alex in To the Hills. So, but I'm going to keep reading this one. It's interesting so far, and we'll see where it goes. And then my bunny chewed version of Song of the Vikings. As you can see, my bunny got at it at some point or another, and along this part of the spine too. Anyway, by Nancy Marie Brown. And I read the first, how far did I get in this one? The first 8 pages, which is just like the introduction, but I already know I'm going to like this one, so I'm going to keep continuing reading it. It's right up my alley. I love, the Viking sagas and everything, and this is basically the story of the guy who wrote them. So I'm definitely going to continue with that one as well, and so we will keep going with those books, and I will update you as I go. All right, little update time. I was sick today, so I didn't end up doing much other than reading, but I got a good chunk into this giant tome. This is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I am now, where am I here? I'm on to chapter 8, which is page 97. And I'm actually finding it starting to get really interesting. I haven't read any huge fantasies like this before, and so it took me a while to get into, but after 100 pages, I'm starting to kind of really get into the story, starting to get a better idea of who's who and the world and all that kind of stuff, all the world building and everything. So that's quite interesting. I read quite a bit of that today. I've been reading Song of the Vikings by Nancy Marie Brown, and I'm going to read some more of this tonight before I go to sleep. I ended up spending most of my day either sleeping or sitting on the couch reading, but I'm still at page 32, so I don't know if I've read any more since I talked to you last on this one, but I will be reading some more of this one tonight. Again, this is a period of history that really interests me, so that one is coming along super interesting. And the Dick Francis one, I am now on chapter 3, which is page 39, and it's starting to pick up too. I'm starting to like the character a lot more and stuff. There's a few things that he said or attitudes he had in the first chapter that I didn't care for, but now that it's getting into it, it's getting to be more classic Dick Francis style writing, and I'm quite enjoying it. So yeah, I'm going to keep reading a little bit more tonight before I go to bed. I got my heating pad on my shoulder, and my shoulder was sore, and got my other little heater to go on because our furnace isn't working properly, and it's winter. Yay! But we're getting a new furnace next week, so. And I'm going to keep reading, and I will update you when I get further into both of these 2 books. And of course, I'll keep updating you on the giant fantasy novel as well, which, like I say, I'm enjoying so far. I'm not super attached to any of the characters in it yet because there's quite a few characters, and I just, like I say, I haven't read any of these big fantasies like this before, so it's taking me a little while to kind of figure out who's who and what's what, but I'm starting to kind of get invested in the story, which is the first step, and then hopefully I will also start to pick characters that I really like. So I will update you on that in the future, and I am going to go and read now. So I am stuck in a hotel room for the night, so I'm off on a trip trimming horse hooves, and so we're staying overnight in a hotel. So I decided, I have my books with me, a couple of them anyways, so I thought I'd give you an update. I am getting quite far into Comeback by Dick Francis. I finished page 122, so I'm on to chapter 7. So I'm getting close to halfway. I think Goodreads tells me I'm at 40%. And this one's getting really interesting. I found after the first chapter, I really started to get into it, and I'm really finding it interesting. So basically, the story is about this guy named Peter Darwin, and he is a British Foreign Office worker, and he gets sent back to Britain, and on his way, he happens to get himself embroiled with these people who are going over there for the lady's daughter's wedding. And it happens to be in his old hometown where he grew up, so he ends up there with them and ends up getting himself involved in a veterinary clinic there that works at the one racetrack, and they are having issues with a string of racehorses that have been coming into them and have been dying in surgery, and so he ends up kind of getting sucked into that. And it's interesting because he grew up there. He's been away for 20 years, but a lot of the people are still the same, involved in the racing and everything, or the children and grandchildren of the people that he knew when he was a young boy. So he knows a lot of the character of the different people involved, and can see that there might be some shady things going on. So that's kind of where I'm at now. He's getting more and more embroiled in things. They've just found on like the first night he was there, the vet clinic, a portion of it got burned, and they discovered it was arson, and then now they've just found a dead body. So it's picking up, getting really interesting. I'm not going to give any spoilers on anything else. That's not really a spoiler. It's just, some of the basic plot points. So anyways, this one is really interesting. I'm quite enjoying it. And I also brought along with me this one here, The Song of the Vikings. And this one was that one that's a nonfiction retelling of the life of Snorri Sturluson, who was the guy who wrote a lot of the Viking sagas. And I'm finding it very interesting as well. I am now on page, let's see, where am I at in this one? I'm on page 88. So I'm getting close to halfway in this one. And the time period is one that really interests me, in particular Iceland and Norway and all of that in that time period. This one takes place actually in about the 1200s, which was when the sagas were written, even though they're written about events that happened in much earlier. But I've been marking a few interesting things, some quotes and stuff like that. I also marked in a few places where I find it really interesting whenever I do read anything about the Vikings and that sort of thing, how much more advanced they were in the treatment of women for the time. So like, for example, I marked a few places, but women could inherit and own land, which was something that wasn't very common in other parts of the world at that time. So that was one of the big laws that was involved there. The women were often responsible for keeping track of genealogies and family gossip, that sort of thing. Some of the other ones that I marked here that were kind of interesting. There was one where it was the first female chieftain in Iceland. This one here was that there was there was no shame attached to a woman who took a lover. If her menfolk didn't like it, it might provoke a feud, but there was no shame in her taking a lover. Things like that. Like, it was quite different from the world that even now that we live in, but quite different from the rest of Europe at the time. Some of the kind of interesting quotes that I found in here that were just interesting. One of them is that they were talking about how writing was done and how ink was made back then and all that sort of thing. And this was here, they were saying that quill pens were cut from swan, goose, and raven feathers, which were easy to come by in Iceland. Left-wing feathers were best for right-handed writers because they bent away from the eye, which I thought was kind of super interesting. I'd never even thought about the fact that the direction, or which wing it came from, would affect the way you would write with it. So that was kind of cool. This part here was funny. They were talking about how these guys were writing sagas, and they would send them to other people to look at and review and that sort of thing. And this here said, Brother Gunnlaug, who described the school at Holar and recorded the tale of Saemund the Wizard, also wrote a saga of King Olaf Tryggvason around 1190. He too sent it to Gisser Halson for comments. Gisser, Gunnlaug complains, kept the book for 2 years. So I thought that was funny because writers were waiting on editors even 900 years ago. So waiting for 2 years for a response from him. Oh yeah, this part was kind of funny here too. This was talking about the gods and goddesses in Norse mythology, and I thought this was quite funny. The gods were a lusty bunch. They had wives and mistresses and casual mates. They divorced and remarried. They stole their brides at sword point, or they picked their husbands for their pretty feet. Even incest was not forbidden. They acknowledged all their children. Some were paragons of strength, like Thor, beauty, Balder, or faithfulness, Vidar. Others were monstrous, though they might have turned out better if raised right. Eight-legged Sleipnir, after all, was not a normal child, and he became Odin's favorite horse. As parents, the gods were pretty dysfunctional. I thought that was a pretty good description of the whole Norse mythology. The gods were extremely dysfunctional in Norse mythology. I think it was probably the same in Greek mythology too, from what I recall from university and that sort of thing. But I thought that was just kind of a funny quote. So yeah, anyways, it's super interesting, and I'm going to carry on with reading that one. I actually am hoping to find some more of her books, this Nancy Marie Brown. I do have one more of hers called Gudrun the Far Traveler, I believe. I'll find it and put it on the screen, that I had read part of at one time, and it was super interesting, so I definitely want to read that one again. And then she does have about 5 or 6 other books that I put on my TBR because I really like her style of writing so far. She's got a bit of a sense of humor in what she writes, and it's very readable, which is always important for a history book. So anyways, that's I'm quite enjoying that so far. So I will let you know when I finish those ones, as they are both very likely going to stay on my shelves. I am going to take a little break from my regular reading and all that kind of fun stuff to try and organize this bookshelf a little bit. This is my fiction shelf. This is also my craft room, so it's a disaster. But this is my fiction area. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to take all the books that I know I'm going to keep, and I'm going to start at the top shelf and start putting them in there alphabetically for that's how I want to lay it out. And then the books that I'm on the fence about, or that are in my Read It or Unhaul It, that kind of thing, will be on the lower shelves. And that way I can kind of keep track of which books I've gone through already, and I can see the progress and whatnot. So I'm just going to do the fiction shelf this way, because with my nonfiction, I've got them by, I've got my nonfiction filed by subject, so it's a little bit different. And then with my kids' bookshelf, which is one over on this side of the room, I'm going to just take all the books that I know I'm going to keep, and I'm going to start with them on the left-hand side and work my way this way with them. And that way I'll know which ones I've decided to keep there too. But that one's just one long shelf, so it's not as big a deal. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing this, and you guys can just watch a time lapse of me climbing up and down and having fun. So Okay, I know it might not look that much different, but it is more organized. So the top 3 shelves and that little bit over there in the corner of the 4th shelf are ones that I'm keeping for sure. And then the rest of these are all ones that I'm going to read and decide. So that's my fiction organized for now. And we'll see where it goes from there. All right, it's time to update you guys on these books. So I finished both of them, which was for my Read It and Unhaul It challenge. So read it or unhaul it. So I'll start with this one because it's the one I finished first. So this was Song of the Vikings, Snorri and the Making of the Norse Myths by Nancy Marie Brown. And this one ended up being my next 5-star book of the year, and it's my first 5-star nonfiction book. I really enjoyed this book. So basically what it is, it tells the story of Snorri Sturluson, who was the 13th century Icelandic chieftain, he was also a poet and a skald, and he wrote down the myths about the Vikings and stuff from like the 700s, 800s, 900s sort of thing. So it was in the early 1200s that he wrote these, but his work is some of the oldest that survived. And so with his work comes pretty much everything that we know about Norse mythology nowadays. So this book basically traced his life, and I really, really enjoyed the way that she weaved the myths in with the actual history. It was very, very well done, and she really painted a really good picture of Iceland in the 1200s. I found myself feeling like I was there quite often. There was one spot here. Yeah, I like this bit here. It's on page 178 of my edition. It says, "It is cold in Iceland in late September. The birch leaves are bright gold. The berry shrubs are crimson. The songbirds have all flown. Swans flock in the marshlands, sounding their haunting note. Night falls quickly and lingers long. The wind has the bite of ice. When the rain lets up, the northern lights wash the sky with streams of emerald and turquoise and sometimes blood." So I've got a cat coming here. Oscar, get down, buddy. Oscar. Okay, Oscar, you go down. He likes to get into trouble. So anyways, that's Oscar. Yeah, so that's like her descriptions of the countryside of Iceland and everything are super interesting. And there's a lot of political intrigue that happened back then. Snorri was trying to become the uncrowned king of Iceland, and so there was a lot of intrigue and all that kind of stuff going on, but he was also a poet, and he wrote the what has given us our Norse mythology. So super interesting book, really highly recommend it. I love her style of writing. She adds humor in the right spots. I found myself laughing quite a few times, and yet it's very well researched. So that was a 5-star book for me, so definitely keeping that one. Then I finished Come Back by Dick Francis. This is the second Dick Francis one that I've read this year. He is one of my favorite authors, writes mystery stories. This one was written in the early 90s, and it follows a guy named Peter Darwin who's on leave from the Foreign Office. And he goes back to the village in England where he grew up, and he finds himself embroiled in the mystery of some expensive racehorses that have died during surgery. And he is trying to help the surgeon figure out what happened. And it ends up leading to there's a human death as well. And the mystery unfolds from there. So this one I ended up giving 4 stars. It was really good. It's not my favorite Dick Francis that I've read, mainly because the main character, I just didn't really like a couple of things about him. Mainly, it was just little things. He grew on me as the story went, but at the beginning, he's saying certain things that, I mean, were probably acceptable in the early 90s, but nowadays, for me anyway, I wouldn't think so. It's things about women and stuff like that. And So I found the spot that I was looking for. Most of it was kind of in the first chapter, which is why I was a little hesitant at the first chapter, but then it got better as I got to know the character more. But it was little things like, oh yeah, he's talking about this older lady that he meets, and she's kind of flirty or whatever, and he says, once a woman, always a woman, I thought. And then he's talking about flying over to England with these two older people, and that it could be interesting talking to them, but he says flight attendants could be chatted up another time, I suppose. Just little things like that just kind of make him seem a little bit like a womanizer, which I'm not overly fond of in characters. But then as it got into the story, it got better and better, and he kind of became a better person, in my opinion. Anyway, but yeah, and then the ending was super interesting. I didn't see it coming. I was incorrect in picking who I thought was the villain, so that's always a plus because I've read a lot of these books, so sometimes I find it a little bit easier to pick who the villain is. So anyways, so I finished that one and I gave it 4 stars, so that one's also going to stay on my wall of books behind me. And then the biggest book that I have ever read. Yes, this one here, The Priory of the Orange Tree, that I got out from the library. I am still reading it. I am now on to part 2, which is 250 pages in. And I'm quite enjoying this one. This is my first attempt at reading like a real high fantasy sort of thing. So I think that's what you would call it. But yeah, so I'm starting to get a little more attached to the characters. Basically, you're following a few different characters. One is her name is Eid Durian, and she is in the court of the queen, and she's there purposely to keep an eye on her. She can do magic, although you don't really learn a lot yet about what that magic is, other than that it involves getting her power from this orange tree at the priory where she grew up. So, but in this kingdom where she's at now, magic is seen as heresy and that sort of thing. So, but she's there to protect the queen because the queen supposedly, if her bloodline dies out, this evil dragon creature called the Nameless One will return and kill everybody. So that's kind of where that is from. And she's quite an interesting character. So far, she's my favorite of all the characters in there. Then there is another character named Tane, and she lives in the East, which is a country that's separated from everybody else, and people aren't allowed in or out. And the dragons that are tormenting the world on the outside are fire dragons. These guys have air and water dragons, I think it is, that they ride and fight with, and all that sort of thing. And so this girl is trying to become a dragon rider, and so she's kind of interesting. And the two storylines are somewhat entwined already because of some characters and whatnot. And then also in that storyline, there's a guy named Nicolas Roos, who's an older doctor, and he's been banished there, and he is getting involved as well. He is trying to come up with an elixir of life to give the queen eternal life so that this Nameless One can't come back. And then there is the other character that I'm finding quite interesting is his name is Loth, and he is a lord of that country, the ruling country, and he gets sent on basically a death errand, and he's trying to survive, and also trying to figure out what's going on and how he can help basically sort of save the world. So it's quite interesting so far. I'm just into part 2, which is like 250 pages in. It's like an 850 page book, so the biggest book I've ever read. So I will be continuing to read that one as I go, but I'm going to end the vlog here because I read the 2 that I had picked from my jar. So give me a like and a subscribe if you have liked this video and want to keep seeing more of my adventures in reading. And I just recently updated my page to call it Rhonda's Ruminations on Reading. And I've got my little logo now, which is a goat reading a book called Ruminations, which is a funny pun if you know goats. And yeah, so that's where I'm at right now. And I'm hoping I pick some good books for the next vlog. So we will see you guys soon.